Historically, economic development follows a highly predictable sequence. An economy transitions from low-yield agriculture, builds wealth through labor-intensive manufacturing, and finally matures into high-skill services. India bypassed this traditional blueprint almost entirely. Instead of building a massive industrial middle, the nation leapt directly from a primary agrarian economy into a tertiary service-led model. This unique trajectory has produced a highly uneven macroeconomic landscape. As of 2026, India ranks 94th out of 167 nations on the UN Sustainable Development Goals Index. That ranking masks a deeply fragmented internal reality. While a third of the country's development targets are strictly on track for the 2030 deadline, nearly a quarter are actively deteriorating, choked by persistent structural bottlenecks. The root of these bottlenecks lies in a stark economic paradox. The sector that generates the vast majority of the nation's wealth does not actually employ the vast majority of its people. When a country achieves high GDP growth without a corresponding structural transition in employment, it creates two parallel realities operating simultaneously: a modern, highly lucrative wealth engine and a deeply stagnant labor trap. 45% of Indian workers remain locked in the agricultural sector. The second chart tracking output shows the tertiary sector dominating at over 50%, compressing the primary sector to 18%. Half the human capital generates less than a fifth of the nation's value. Because the secondary and tertiary sectors have not created enough high-yield jobs to absorb these workers, the labor force is forced to remain static. The overall economy expands rapidly, but the physical location of the workers does not change. This exact asymmetry between economic output and employment distribution drives India's endemic poverty cycle. It traps millions of citizens in low productivity tasks, capping their earning potential regardless of how fast the broader GDP grows. This pipeline diagram maps how human capital normally flows through an economy, but notice the massive gap in the center. This is the missing middle, a direct result of the historical failure to build a robust, labor-intensive manufacturing base. The tertiary sector relies heavily on high-skill services like IT and finance. It simply cannot absorb a massive, largely unskilled rural workforce looking to transition out of farming. With nowhere else to go, those workers stay on the farm, creating a condition known as disguised unemployment. When labor effort is divided among too many people, individual productivity drops to zero. Consider an agricultural plot with 5 workers. Pull 2 workers off to a factory, and the total crop yield does not decrease. The remaining 3 maintain the exact same output. Those extra 2 workers were technically employed, but their labor was entirely redundant. The appearance of full employment on paper actively masks the severe underutilization of actual human capability. Holding a job in an oversaturated primary sector does not indicate genuine economic participation. In the absence of an industrial middle, it is strictly a survival mechanism. The recent macroeconomic tracking data boasts a historically low structural unemployment rate of 3.1%. Alongside this shrinking unemployment figure, the female labor force participation rate has shown a significant quantitative rise, which initially appears to signal positive inclusive growth. However, critical analysis from Niti Aayog's policy research indicates these metrics are heavily driven by distress-induced employment rather than genuine structural opportunity. Because real wages and casual labor have remained stagnant, households require more members to work simply to meet basic needs. Marginalized populations are forced into informal, low-yield agricultural tasks just to survive the month. Over 80% of this distressed workforce is absorbed into the unorganized sector. These are street vendors, casual laborers, and informal workers, operating entirely outside of government regulations, without guaranteed minimum wages, job security, or legal recourse. Treating this distressed labor as a positive economic indicator hides a massive vulnerability trap. It leaves the vast majority of the population exposed, living essentially one minor crisis away from severe poverty. To correct these deep structural bottlenecks, the state is shifting away from traditional bureaucratic administration toward nonlinear, data-driven policy models engineered by Niti Aayog. On this dashboard model, you can see the primary supply-side intervention. The Production-Linked Incentive, or PLI scheme, is designed to rebuild that missing industrial middle by incentivizing massive, labor-intensive manufacturing capacity. Simultaneously, the DPI at 2047 framework utilizes digital public infrastructure, specifically identity, payments, and data sharing layers, to bypass bureaucratic friction and accelerate financial inclusion. By linking unbanked citizens directly to digital payment networks and biometric identity systems, the state forces nonlinear economic formalization. Millions of previously invisible, unorganized workers are instantly integrated into the formal economic matrix. Solving decades of structural stagnation cannot be done with paper registries. It requires building a technological architecture that finally makes the unorganized sector visible, measurable, and accessible to the state. Once visible, the state can utilize direct benefit transfers to funnel resources precisely where they are needed. This allows the government to rapidly expand social protection floors, actively bridging the vulnerability gap for informal workers. The scale of this intervention is immense. In 1 decade, the population covered by formal social protection systems expanded from 22% to over 65%. Moving forward, the administrative roadmap must address the remaining critical deficits. The public distribution system must evolve past basic grain sufficiency into aggressive, targeted biofortification to combat severe developmental traps, like the 19% child wasting rate. Concurrently, the state must aggressively decouple industrial GDP growth from carbon generation. Transitioning heavy manufacturing away from coal toward green energy is required to lower the record 2.21 ton per capita emissions rate. To ensure these macro-level transitions actually occur on the ground, frameworks like the Panchayat Advancement Index and Aspirational Districts program are deploying real-time data tracking to enforce strict administrative accountability at the local village level. India's economic future no longer relies on a classic structural progression. It depends on merging high-level digital infrastructure with empowered, data-driven local governance to finally align the nation's wealth with the work of its people.